In the year 530 AD, two empires stood on the edge of total war. The Roman Empire, weakened by decades of conflict, faced an existential threat from the east. The Persian Empire, under its ambitious king Kavad I, had mobilized the largest invasion force seen in a generation. 50,000 Persian warriors, the finest cavalry in the known world, were marching toward the Roman frontier. Their target was a small fortress town called Dara, defended by only 25,000 Romans. The odds were impossible. Defeat seemed certain. But one man, a Roman general named Belisarius, refused to accept fate. What he did next would change the course of history and redefine the art of war itself.
This ridge. They'll pour down it in waves, heavy first, light after. If we hold this throat, we buy the day. Lose it and we're dust.
That's a lot of horse for one throat, General.
Then we make it choke. Stakes here, shield wall here. When they break, we cut through the flank and drive them into the rocks.
And if they don't...
He would defeat an army twice his size, without superior numbers, without better equipment, and without the legendary Roman legions of old. His weapon was not steel, it was earth. This is the story of how one brilliant mind turned dirt into victory and saved an empire from collapse. The sun rose over the plains of Mesopotamia on a spring morning in 530 AD. And with it came the thunder of thousands of hooves. The Persian army was on the move. For months, rumors had spread through the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. The Persians were coming, not with raiding parties or border skirmishes, but with a full invasion force. The great King Kavad had grown tired of the endless conflicts along the frontier. He wanted to settle the question of supremacy once and for all. His target was the fortress of Dara.
Look here, by the river fort. Their camp stretches to the tree line.
That's more banners than we counted yesterday.
They keep coming. Columns behind columns.
Silence, listen. Thunder, the gods are restless.
Restless or angry, it changes nothing. We're 5 cohorts against that.
If we don't warn the...
A Roman stronghold that stood as the last significant barrier between Persia and the wealthy provinces of Syria and Anatolia.
Then we strike before dawn, my king.
Before they can wake to fear us.
Move those bags! Stack them twice high! Javelins to the east wall!
Hurry! Hoist! Hoist!
Keep the line clear!
Watch your footing there!
They're coming. Hold fast, men.
If Dara fell, the road to Constantinople itself would lie open. The Romans knew what was at stake. Emperor Justinian, newly crowned and ambitious, had dreams of restoring the glory of Rome. He had reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals. He was planning the reconquest of Italy. But all of his grand visions would mean nothing if the eastern frontier collapsed. The Persians had to be stopped at Dara. The problem was finding someone capable of stopping them. The Roman army of 530 was not the legendary force that had conquered the Mediterranean centuries before. The legions were gone, replaced by a mixture of professional soldiers, barbarian federates, and hastily recruited provincials. Discipline had declined. Training was inconsistent. Morale was fragile. Against the elite cavalry of Persia, even veteran Roman troops struggled. The empire needed a miracle. It got Belisarius. Belisarius was 30 years old in the summer of 530. He was tall, charismatic, and already marked as one of the most promising officers in the Roman army. Born in Thrace, somewhere in the Balkans, he had risen through the ranks with remarkable speed. His early campaigns against bandits and raiders had shown his tactical brilliance. He understood something that many Roman commanders had forgotten. Wars are not won by courage alone. They are won by preparation, intelligence, and the ability to turn your enemy's strengths into weaknesses. When Justinian appointed him to command the forces defending Dara, Belisarius was given an impossible task. Hold the frontier against overwhelming odds. Do not lose. The emperor offered limited reinforcements. There were no legions to spare. Belisarius would have to make do with what he had: 25,000 men, a small fortress, and open ground that favored cavalry. Most commanders would have retreated. Belisarius studied the terrain. The fortress of Dara sat on a plain, exposed and vulnerable. The Persians excelled at cavalry warfare, using mounted archers and heavily armored cataphracts to break enemy formations. In open battle, they were nearly unstoppable. Roman infantry, even good infantry, struggled against the speed and firepower of Persian horsemen. The conventional wisdom was simple: do not fight the Persians in the open. Stay behind walls, wait for reinforcements. But Belisarius saw the situation differently. If he retreated into the fortress, the Persians would simply besiege him. They had the numbers to surround Dara and starve the garrison into submission. If he marched out to meet them in traditional formation, his troops would be massacred. He needed a third option. He needed to fight on his terms, not theirs. So Belisarius did something extraordinary. He decided to build a battlefield. Not fortifications in the traditional sense, but a carefully engineered killing ground that would negate every advantage the Persian army possessed. His weapon would be the earth itself. He ordered his men to dig, not walls or ramparts, but trenches. Long, deep trenches that ran parallel to the expected Persian line of advance. These were not random ditches. They were precisely calculated obstacles designed to channel, disrupt, and break cavalry charges. Belisarius positioned the main trench directly in front of his center, creating a barrier that Persian horsemen could not easily cross. He dug smaller perpendicular trenches at angles, creating zones where attacking cavalry would be funneled into narrow killing corridors. He left carefully planned gaps, spaces where the Persians could advance, but only in ways that exposed them to concentrated fire from Roman archers and infantry. The men grumbled as they dug. Soldiers always grumble when given manual labor instead of glory. But Belisarius understood something his troops did not yet realize. Every shovel of dirt they moved was a weapon being forged. Every trench line was a tactical advantage being created. The Persian cavalry was fast, powerful, and deadly, but it was also predictable. Horsemen need space to maneuver. They need momentum to charge effectively. Take away their mobility, force them into confined spaces, and suddenly the most fearsome cavalry in the world becomes vulnerable. Belisarius was not just building defenses, he was building a trap. While his men dug, Belisarius studied intelligence reports. Persian scouts had been spotted in the area. The main army was days away, moving slowly under the weight of its supply train and siege equipment. Belisarius had time, but not much. He used every hour to refine his plan. He positioned his infantry in the center, behind the main trench line, where they could hold a defensive position and use their shields and spears to maximum effect. He placed his cavalry on the flanks, divided into two wings. These were not the heavily armored cataphracts of Persia, but they were disciplined and could maneuver quickly. Most importantly, Belisarius positioned units of Hunnic horse archers on the extreme flanks. These were mercenaries, fierce nomadic warriors who fought for gold rather than loyalty to Rome. They were the key to his entire strategy. The Hunnic archers were experts at hit-and-run tactics. They could fire arrows at full gallop, retreat before the enemy could respond, and repeat the process endlessly. In open terrain, they were nearly impossible to pin down. Belisarius planned to use them as mobile firepower, harassing the Persian flanks while his infantry held the center. If the Persians committed too heavily to the center, the Huns would punish their flanks. If the Persians tried to sweep around the flanks to envelope the Roman position, they would find themselves channeled by the trenches and exposed to concentrated archery. It was a brilliant plan, but it depended on precise execution and the courage of men who were already outnumbered and outmatched. On the fifth day, the Persians arrived. The Roman scouts saw them first. a dark mass on the horizon, growing larger with each passing hour. The Persian army was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Banners flew in the wind, silk and gold catching the sunlight. The sound of drums echoed across the plain, a rhythmic thunder that seemed to shake the earth itself. At the front rode the cataphracts, the heavy cavalry that had shattered armies from India to Egypt. These were not ordinary horsemen. They were living fortresses, men and horses both encased in scale armor that could turn aside arrows and spear thrusts. Behind them came thousands of mounted archers, light cavalry trained from childhood to shoot from the saddle with deadly accuracy. And behind them, stretching back toward the horizon, came the infantry, the supply wagons, the siege engines. It was an army built to conquer empires. The Persian commander was a man named Perozes, a veteran general who had won victories across the eastern frontier. He was confident, perhaps too confident. The Romans were outnumbered 2-1. They were dug in like frightened rabbits, hiding behind ditches instead of meeting their enemies with honor. Perozes had fought Romans before. He knew they were tough, disciplined, and dangerous at close quarters. But he also knew that Persian cavalry had broken Roman lines 100 times. This would be no different. He would sweep forward with overwhelming force. His cataphracts would smash through the Roman center, and by nightfall, Dara would be his. He gave the order to advance. The Persian army moved forward in 3 massive columns. The center was dominated by the cataphracts, a wall of armored men and horses that seemed unstoppable. The flanks were composed of lighter cavalry, thousands of mounted archers who would rain arrows on the Roman position before closing for the kill. It was a textbook Persian battle formation, the same tactic that had won countless victories. Perozes expected the Romans to panic. He expected them to break and run when they saw the full might of Persia bearing down on them. Instead, the Romans stood firm, and as the Persians advanced, they encountered the first of Belisarius's surprises. The lead units of Persian cavalry reached the main trench line and stopped. The trench was deeper than expected, too wide to jump, too steep to cross at speed. Horses shied away from the edge, refusing to leap into the unknown. The riders tried to force them forward, but the animals knew better. Behind them, more units were advancing, creating a massive traffic jam as thousands of horsemen piled up along the trench line. Perozes ordered his men to find the gaps, the crossing points that Belisarius had deliberately left open. The Persians began to funnel through these narrow passages, exactly as Belisarius had planned. And as they did, the Roman archers opened fire. Arrows filled the sky, thousands of them, launched in coordinated volleys from the Roman center and flanks. The Persians were packed together in the narrow crossing points, unable to maneuver, unable to spread out. They were perfect targets. Men screamed as iron-tipped shafts punched through armor and flesh. Horses reared and bolted, throwing their riders and creating chaos in the ranks behind them. The cataphracts, so fearsome in open battle, were helpless in the confined space of the trenches. Their heavy armor, which protected them from frontal assaults, made them slow and vulnerable when trapped. They could not charge effectively. They could not retreat easily. They could only endure the storm of arrows and try to push forward. But pushing forward meant climbing out of the trench under fire, regrouping on open ground, and then attempting to assault the Roman infantry line. It was a nightmare. Every step was contested. Every advance was paid for in blood. The Persians were brave, there was no question about that. They kept coming, wave after wave, trying to break through by sheer force of numbers. But Belisarius had prepared for this. His infantry was positioned in deep ranks, shields locked together, spears bristling like a hedge of steel. When the Persian cavalry finally reached them, exhausted and disorganized from the crossing, they met a wall of Roman discipline. The fighting in the center was brutal and desperate. Persian horsemen crashed into the Roman shield wall again and again, trying to find a weak point, a gap they could exploit. The Roman infantry held. They were not the legendary legionaries of old, but they were professionals, men who knew their trade and trusted their officers. They braced their shields, set their spears, and met the Persian charges with cold determination. Men died on both sides, but the line held. Belisarius rode behind his troops, shouting encouragement, repositioning units, ensuring that fresh soldiers rotated to the front while exhausted men fell back to rest. He was everywhere, visible to his troops, a constant reminder that someone was in control, that the plan was working. Meanwhile, on the flanks, the Hunnic horse archers were executing their part of the plan with savage efficiency. They swept around the edges of the Persian formation, firing arrows into the packed masses of enemy cavalry, then wheeling away before the Persians could respond. They were ghosts, impossible to catch, impossible to pin down. Every time the Persians tried to pursue them, the Huns would retreat, leading their pursuers away from the main battle and into open ground where they became isolated and vulnerable. It was psychological warfare as much as physical combat. The Persians could see the Huns, could even shoot back at them occasionally, but they could never quite reach them, never quite make them pay for their harassment. Perozes watched from his command position and felt the first stirrings of doubt. This was not going according to plan. His army was stuck on the Roman trenches, taking casualties without making progress. His flanks were being harassed by infuriatingly mobile horse archers who refused to stand and fight. And worst of all, the Roman center was holding. It should have broken by now. Any sane commander, facing overwhelming numbers, should have ordered a retreat. But the Romans were not retreating. They were fighting with the kind of disciplined ferocity that Perozes had not seen in years. He needed a new strategy. He needed to break the Roman line before morale collapsed and his own troops started to panic. So Perozes made a decision that seemed logical at the time, but would prove disastrous. He ordered a general assault, throwing everything he had at the Roman center. Every available unit of cavalry, including his reserves, would charge simultaneously. The sheer weight of numbers would overwhelm the defenses. The trenches could not stop everyone. Some units would break through, and once they were behind the Roman line, the battle would be over. It was a gamble, but Perozes was confident. He had 50,000 men. The Romans had only 25,000. Mathematics, if nothing else, was on his side. The second Persian assault was even more massive than the first. Thousands of horsemen surged forward, a tide of flesh and steel that seemed capable of drowning any opposition. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves, the air filled with battle cries in a dozen languages. The Persians came on with desperate courage, knowing that their empire's prestige depended on victory. They crossed the trenches, taking horrific casualties but pressing forward through sheer determination. They reached the Roman line and crashed into it like a wave hitting a cliff. For a moment, it seemed like the line would break. The Roman infantry staggered under the impact. Units began to buckle. Soldiers looked to their officers with fear in their eyes. And then, Belisarius played his final card. He had been holding back a reserve force, kept hidden behind the main line, waiting for exactly this moment. Now he committed them. Fresh troops poured forward, reinforcing the wavering sections of the line. At the same moment, Belisarius ordered his own cavalry wings to attack. The Roman and Hunnic horsemen, who had been content to harass the Persian flanks, now charged directly into the sides of the Persian assault. It was a perfectly timed counterattack, hitting the Persians at the moment of maximum chaos and exhaustion. The Persian cavalry, already disorganized from the trench crossings and the fighting at the Roman line, suddenly found themselves attacked from 3 directions at once. The battle turned into a massacre. The Persians, packed together in the narrow killing ground between the trenches and the Roman line, could not maneuver. They could not retreat without trampling their own comrades. They could not advance against the reinforced Roman infantry. And now they were being cut down from the sides by fresh cavalry charges. Panic began to spread. Units started to break, individual soldiers turning to flee, which created more chaos as mounted men tried to ride through infantry formations. The Roman cavalry pursued ruthlessly, cutting down fleeing Persians and driving them back toward their own lines. Perozes tried to rally his troops, but the situation was spiraling out of control. What had started as an organized assault had become a rout. His cataphracts, the elite of his army, were scattered and disorganized. His light cavalry was fleeing in all directions, pursued by the Huns. His infantry, which had not yet engaged, was standing idle and watching the cavalry being slaughtered. Morale was collapsing. Soldiers were throwing down their weapons and running. Officers were losing control of their units. The great Persian invasion, which had marched with such confidence just hours before, was disintegrating. As the afternoon wore on, the scale of the disaster became clear. The Persians had lost thousands of men, perhaps as many as 8,000 killed, and countless more wounded or captured. Their cavalry, the pride of the empire, had been shattered. Their siege equipment, which they had brought to break down the walls of Dara, sat abandoned on the battlefield. And most importantly, their will to fight was broken. Perozes ordered a full retreat, pulling his remaining forces back to regroup and assess the damage. The Romans did not pursue aggressively. Belisarius was too smart to risk his victory by overextending. He had won, and he knew when to stop. The Battle of Dara was over. In a single day, Belisarius had achieved the impossible. With an army half the size of his enemy, fighting on unfavorable terrain, he had won a complete and decisive victory. He had done it not through superior numbers or better equipment, but through intelligence, preparation, and a deep understanding of how to turn his enemy's strengths into weaknesses. The trenches had neutralized the Persian cavalry advantage. The careful positioning of his troops had created overlapping fields of fire that maximized his archery. The use of Hunnic horse archers on the flanks had prevented the Persians from enveloping his position, and his perfectly timed counterattack had turned a defensive battle into a crushing offensive victory. The news of the victory reached Constantinople and was received with astonishment and joy. Emperor Justinian promoted Belisarius and gave him greater authority over the eastern armies. The Persian Empire, shocked by the defeat, withdrew its forces and sued for peace. The immediate threat to the Roman frontier was over. Belisarius became a legend, celebrated as the greatest general of his age. But the man himself remained humble. When asked how he had won, he simply said that he had used the tools available to him. He had turned earth into fortification, time into preparation, and intelligence into victory. The Battle of Dara had profound consequences that echoed far beyond the immediate military outcome. For the Roman Empire, it was a psychological turning point. For decades, the Romans had been on the defensive in the east, reacting to Persian aggression and struggling to hold their ground. The victory at Dara proved that Rome could still win, that its armies could still defeat the best that Persia could field. It gave Justinian the confidence to pursue his ambitious plans for reconquest in the west. Within a few years, Roman armies would retake North Africa, southern Spain, and most of Italy. The dream of restoring the Roman Empire, which had seemed impossible just years before, suddenly appeared achievable. For the Persian Empire, Dara was a humiliation that would not be forgotten. The defeat shattered the myth of Persian invincibility and exposed weaknesses in their military system. The Persian kings would spend the next decades trying to reform their armies, adopting some of the defensive tactics that Belisarius had used so effectively. But the psychological damage was done. The Romans had learned that they could win, and the Persians had learned that they could lose. The balance of power in the east had shifted, not permanently, but significantly enough to change the strategic calculus for both empires. But beyond the grand strategic implications, the Battle of Dara taught lessons that would influence military thinking for centuries. Belisarius had demonstrated the power of defensive engineering, of using terrain and fortifications to multiply the effectiveness of a smaller force. His trenches at Dara were not revolutionary in themselves. Armies had been digging defensive positions for thousands of years. What was revolutionary was the sophistication and precision with which he used them. He did not simply build obstacles. He created a three-dimensional battlefield where every trench, every gap, every line of sight had been calculated to channel enemy forces into predetermined killing zones. Modern military historians recognize the Battle of Dara as an early example of defense in depth, a tactical doctrine that would become central to military thinking in later centuries. Instead of relying on a single strongpoint or defensive line, Belisarius created multiple layers of defense, each designed to slow, disrupt, and weaken the enemy attack. The trenches forced the Persians to slow down and bunch up. The infantry line absorbed their momentum and held them in place. The cavalry wings delivered the killing blow from the flanks. It was a system, not a static defense, and it worked because every element supported the others. The battle also demonstrated the importance of combined arms warfare, the integration of different types of military units into a coordinated whole. Belisarius used infantry, heavy cavalry, light cavalry, and archers, each performing specific roles that complemented the others. His infantry held the center, providing a stable anvil. His cavalry provided mobility and striking power, acting as the hammer. His archers delivered ranged firepower, weakening the enemy before they reached the main line. And his Hunnic horse archers provided harassment and psychological pressure, preventing the Persians from concentrating their forces effectively. No single element could have won the battle alone. Together, they were unstoppable. Perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Dara showed the power of leadership and preparation. Belisarius won because he thought ahead, anticipated his enemy's tactics, and prepared the battlefield to negate their advantages. He won because he understood his own troops' capabilities and limitations, and he designed a plan that played to their strengths while protecting their weaknesses. He won because he remained calm under pressure, adapted to changing circumstances, and made decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking. These are timeless principles of leadership that apply in any era, in any field of human endeavor. The Roman soldiers who fought at Dara never forgot that day. One veteran, whose account was preserved in Byzantine chronicles, later wrote, "We were afraid when we saw them coming. The Persians were so many, and we were so few. But the general told us to trust the plan, to hold our positions, to do our duty. And when the battle was over, when we saw the Persians running and we were still standing, we understood. We had not won because we were stronger. We had won because we were smarter." Belisarius himself would go on to greater victories. He would reconquer North Africa from the Vandals, defeat the Ostrogoths in Italy, and defend Constantinople from barbarian invasions. But the Battle of Dara remained his masterpiece, the perfect expression of his military genius. It was the battle where he proved that intelligence and preparation could defeat overwhelming odds, where he showed that the true weapon of war was not the sword or the spear, but the human mind. The legacy of Dara, the fortress of Dara itself. But in the end, the Battle of Dara was not just a military victory. It was a demonstration of what human ingenuity can achieve when faced with impossible challenges. Belisarius had no secret weapons, no technological advantages. That is the real lesson of the Battle of Dara. In the face of the Persian army that limped away from Dara, when we remember the Battle of Dara today, we remember it not just as another ancient